The evening lights in the restaurant were warm and golden. Soft music played in the background and expensive perfume filled the air. Laughter came from the tables where the city's rich and powerful gathered. They were celebrating business deals, drinking wine and showing off their wealth. Among them sat a man named Mr. Dalton, a known millionaire with sharp eyes and a smile that carried pride. He liked attention. He liked power. He liked when people laughed at his jokes. Across the room, a young waitress named Lily hurried between the tables, balancing trays filled with plates and glasses. She moved carefully, her old shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Her hair was tied neatly, but a few strands had escaped and fell near her tired face. Her uniform was clean but faded. She smiled politely at everyone, even when customers were rude. For her, this job wasn't just work, it was survival. Mr. Dalton noticed her when she almost slipped while serving a tray of drinks. His table laughed, and he smirked. "Look at her, she's shaking," he said. His friends joined in. Their voices were loud enough for Lily to hear. Her face turned red, but she kept serving silently, trying not to cry. The restaurant had a grand piano near the corner, covered in dust and surrounded by flowers. It was only played on special occasions. Tonight, no one had touched it. The piano reminded Lily of something distant, like a memory she was trying to hide. After finishing his drink, Mr. Dalton leaned back in his chair, bored and looking for amusement. "Hey, waitress," he said, his voice echoing through the room. Everyone stopped talking for a moment. Lily turned toward him. "Yes, sir?" she asked softly. "Do you know how to play that piano?" he asked, pointing toward the corner. His friends chuckled. She blinked, confused. "No, sir," she said quickly. "Oh, come on, it's just keys," he said. "I'll give you $100 if you can play something decent," the crowd murmured. Some of the guests whispered and smiled. Others looked uncomfortable. The restaurant manager frowned, but he didn't stop the man. He couldn't risk upsetting such a wealthy client. Lily froze in place. Her heart pounded. She felt everyone's eyes on her. Her hands were trembling. She wanted to disappear. But somewhere inside her something whispered. A memory. Her mother's voice saying, "Never let anyone make you feel small, my sweet girl." She looked at the piano again, the same way she once looked at an old broken keyboard at home when she was a child. Her mother used to teach her songs late at night back when life was still kind. Those were the only moments when Lily felt alive, when music made her forget everything painful. Mr. Dalton laughed again. "Come on, waitress, we're waiting," he said, tapping his watch. His friends clapped mockingly. "Show us your talent," one shouted. The sound of their laughter filled the room again. Lily took a deep breath. For a second, she thought about walking away. But then she remembered the reason she worked. Her mother lying sick in a small apartment. Her little brother waiting for medicine they couldn't afford. She couldn't afford to be humiliated. But she also couldn't afford to be weak. So she set the tray down, carefully placed her notepad on the counter, and walked slowly toward the piano. Every step felt heavy. The room grew quieter. Even the soft background music stopped. The millionaire smirked, thinking he had won. She reached the piano and stood still for a moment. The smell of polished wood filled her nose. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glossy black surface. Her fingers hovered over the keys but didn't touch them yet. "Go on then," Mr. Dalton said. "Let's hear this masterpiece." More laughter followed. But this time, something changed in Lily's eyes. The fear began to fade, replaced by calm. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her posture like she had done countless times before as a child. Her fingers brushed the keys gently, like greeting an old friend. The sound of a single note echoed softly through the room. It was pure, delicate, and haunting. People stopped whispering, even Mr. Dalton leaned forward slightly. For the first time in years, Lily felt something she had forgotten: control. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was her voice, her shield, her courage. She closed her eyes, took one deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes floated through the air like drops of light. The noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by music that spoke of loss, hope, and hidden strength. The laughter stopped completely. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. In that moment, the rich man's dare became something else entirely. It became the moment he would never forget. The girl he tried to humiliate was about to show everyone who she truly was. And before the night ended, even the millionaire himself would be speechless. The restaurant was still quiet after Lily's last note faded into the air. The guests didn't know what to do. They had come to eat and laugh, not to witness something so beautiful. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then a soft clap started from the back, slow and unsure, but soon it grew louder, echoing off the walls, filling the entire place with applause. Lily stood there, unsure how to react. Her heart was still racing. Her hands were shaking. She didn't play for them. She played because she couldn't keep the music inside anymore. She looked down, embarrassed. Her cheeks were red. The same people who laughed at her were now on their feet, clapping. Some even looked guilty. "Mister." Dalton was frozen. His proud smile had disappeared. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "That was you?" he whispered. His voice was quiet now, no longer filled with arrogance. He didn't understand how a simple waitress could play like that. He had expected noise, embarrassment, something to laugh at, but instead he had been silenced. Lily turned away and went back behind the counter. She didn't bow or say thank you. She simply returned to her work. The applause continued, but she didn't seem to care. For her, the music wasn't about showing off. It was something private, something that belonged to her and her mother. The restaurant manager hurried to her, whispering, "Lily, that was incredible. Where did you learn that?" She only smiled faintly. "A long time ago," she said softly. Then she picked up a tray and walked toward another table as if nothing had happened. Mr. Dalton couldn't stop watching her. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Respect, and maybe a little shame. His friends were whispering now, uncomfortable. One of them said, "Dalton, you just made a fool of yourself." He didn't answer. Instead, he called for the manager. "Bring me the waitress," he said quietly. Lily came over, her eyes calm. "Yes, sir?" she asked. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. "From my mother," she replied. "She used to be a pianist before she got sick." Dalton nodded slowly. He didn't know what to say. "You shouldn't be working here," he said after a pause. "You belong on a stage." She smiled politely. "Stages don't pay rent, sir," she said, and started to leave. That answer stayed in his mind like a sharp knife. The laughter at his table had completely died. The people who once looked up to him now looked at him differently. He felt small, smaller than he'd ever been. Later that night, when the crowd was gone and the chairs were stacked, Lily cleaned the tables in silence. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the empty space. She hummed a tune under her breath, the same one she had played earlier. It was her mother's favorite song. Outside, Mr. Dalton stood by his car. He didn't drive away. Instead, he stared through the window at her. He thought about how he had mocked her, how easily he had used his money to hurt someone just to entertain his friends. And yet, that same girl had something he didn't: grace, strength, and talent that couldn't be bought. When Lily stepped outside to take out the trash, she saw him still standing there. She froze for a second. "Sir?" she asked. He turned and gave her a small, respectful nod. "You changed something tonight," he said quietly. "Not just the mood, but something in me too." She didn't reply. She only smiled and said, "Good night, sir." After she walked away, Dalton stayed there, watching her disappear down the street under the yellow glow of the lamps. For the first time, he didn't feel like a millionaire. He felt like a man who had just met someone richer than he'd ever be. Inside the restaurant, the piano remained open, one key slightly pressed down as if waiting for her to return. And though the night had ended, everyone who heard that music knew something rare had happened. A truth had been revealed. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest miracles, and sometimes the ones who serve you your dinner have a story you'll never forget. The next morning, the restaurant's phone wouldn't stop ringing. People weren't calling to reserve tables, they were calling to ask about the girl who played the piano. Some asked for her name, others offered to send flowers. One woman even said, "I cried just watching the video online." Because yes, someone had recorded it, the full performance. From the first note to the last breath of silence. It was now all over social media. On one platform alone, the video had already crossed 1 million views in less than 12 hours. Lily had no idea. She had no social media, no internet at home. She didn't even own a smartphone. All she had was a second-hand flip phone and a bus pass. She arrived that morning the same way she always did. Quiet, early, and focused. She changed into her worn-out uniform, tied her apron, and walked into the dining area. But something was different. People were staring. The cooks smiled when they saw her. The manager even offered her coffee, something he had never done before. "Lily, you're famous," one of the younger waiters said. She raised her eyebrow, confused. He pulled out his phone and showed her the video. It was blurry but clear enough to show her sitting at the piano, pouring her heart out. The sound echoed through the phone speaker, and she looked away. She felt embarrassed. To her, it had been a private moment, not something for the world to see. But now strangers knew her name. People in the comments were calling her the piano angel and the soul waitress. Later that day, 2 people walked into the restaurant. They weren't customers, they were wearing suits and carried fancy leather folders. The manager greeted them and called Lily over. "Miss Morgan?" One of them asked politely. Lily nodded, unsure. "My name is Claire Renaud. I represent the Conservatory of Classical Arts." Lily's eyes widened. That was the same conservatory she had once dreamed of joining as a child, before everything went wrong. "We saw your video," Claire continued, "and after reviewing it, we believe you still have the gift." Lily stayed silent. She didn't know what to say. "We're offering you a full scholarship, if you're willing to train again," Claire said gently. Lily almost dropped her tray. She blinked, trying to hold back tears. I haven't touched a real piano in years," she whispered. Claire smiled. "That doesn't matter. What we heard last night was raw talent and soul, Mr." Dalton was sitting at his usual table, quietly watching the entire scene. He had come early just to see her, but now he felt like a background actor in someone else's movie. And maybe he was. He stood up and walked over. "Miss Lily," he said softly, "I owe you more than an apology." She looked at him, not with anger, but with a calm sadness. "I wanted to offer you something too," he said, not out of guilt, but out of respect. He handed her a folded piece of paper. Inside it was a check, enough to pay for her mother's medical treatment and much more. "I can't accept this," Lily said quickly. "You can," he replied, "not for you, but for your family." She looked at him closely this time. He wasn't mocking her now. He wasn't surrounded by laughing friends. He looked like a man who had just learned something real about life. She took the check with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she said simply. "No thank you," Dalton replied, "for reminding me that money doesn't measure worth." As he left the restaurant, someone held the door open for him. It was the same young waiter who once giggled when Lily was dared to play. Now he looked at her with quiet admiration. That afternoon, Lily walked into the break room and sat alone. She opened the folded brochure from the conservatory. The pictures showed grand stages, polished pianos, and glowing lights. She touched the page gently, then looked at her hands. They were still sore from carrying plates, but they were ready. The girl who once played in the shadows was being called into the light, and this time, she wouldn't walk away from it absolutely. "Here is part 4 of your story. Written in simple English with emotionally rich narration and commas instead of periods. Perfect for AI voiceover and YouTube storytelling." 3 days had passed since Lily's life quietly began to change, but she still showed up at the restaurant on time, wearing her faded shoes and her simple smile. To her, nothing felt different, even though everything was. People whispered when she walked by. Some offered kind smiles. Some stayed silent, unsure how to act around someone who had become more than just a waitress overnight. The video of her piano performance had now crossed 5 million views. Music bloggers were writing about the girl with golden hands. Students from music schools reposted clips of her performance with captions like, "I got chills." But Lily wasn't chasing any of it. She still washed dishes during her breaks and counted tips to buy medicine for her mother. But something happened on Thursday, something she didn't expect around noon. A black car pulled up outside the restaurant. Not a regular fancy car, but one of those rare ones you only see in music documentaries or presidential events. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a gray coat and holding a silver cane. His face was wrinkled with age, but his eyes were sharp like piano keys, black and white and full of memory. He entered the restaurant and looked around slowly. Everyone stared. He pointed to the grand piano in the corner and then asked the manager, "Where is the girl who played this?" The manager pointed toward Lily, who was quietly refilling water glasses. She didn't notice him at first, not until the room went completely silent. "Miss Lily Morgan?" the man said. She turned and looked at him, puzzled. "Yes?" She answered, "My name is Albrecht Voss," he said. "You probably don't know me, but I've been teaching piano for 60 years. Her eyes widened. She knew that name. Albrecht Voss wasn't just a teacher. He was a legend. He had trained world-famous pianists and was once called the hand that taught the hands. "I watched your video," he said gently. 3 times, and the 3rd time I cried. Lily was frozen. She didn't know what to say. "You played from pain, not pride," he continued. "That kind of playing cannot be taught, but it can be shaped." He paused, then looked at her with something close to reverence. "I want to offer you something, not money, not fame. Just time, 3 months of private training, no fees, no cameras, just you, me, and the piano." Lily's hands trembled. Everyone was watching. But in that moment, the world around her blurred. She saw only him, this old master offering her what she had once thought was lost forever. I don't know if I'm good enough," she whispered. He smiled. "Then you're ready." The room broke into applause again. Not loud like before, but soft, respectful. Even Mr. Dalton, who had returned quietly and sat in the back corner, clapped with both hands and a bowed head. Lily accepted. She didn't think, she didn't plan. She simply felt, like the music inside her had just been invited to breathe again. That evening, she went home and told her mother. Tears filled her mother's eyes. "You're going to play again?" she asked, her voice shaking. Lily nodded and held her mother's frail hand. "I'm not playing for them," she whispered. "I'm playing for you." The next morning, she didn't put on her waitress apron. She put on a simple white blouse, tied her hair back neatly, and carried an old music notebook she had kept hidden for years. She didn't walk to the bus stop, a car sent by Mr. Voss was waiting outside her building. As it drove through the city, Lily looked out the window. The buildings, the people, the world, it all felt new. Not because the city had changed, but because she had, that day. In a quiet studio lined with books and pianos, she sat beside Albrecht Voss and began her first real lesson. He didn't correct her right away. He didn't give her scales or tests. He just asked, "What do you want to say with your music?" And Lily, for the first time, answered without fear, "I want them to feel what I never said out loud." She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes and played, not as a waitress who had been dared, but as a musician finally coming home. "Would you like me to continue with part 5 next?" The days passed quietly, but something loud was growing inside Lily. It wasn't noise, it was purpose. Each morning she walked into Mr. Voss's studio, not as a waitress, not as a girl carrying worries on her back, but as a pianist learning how to speak with her hands. The studio smelled like old wood and faded sheet music. The walls were lined with shelves stacked full of stories in the form of notes. There were no clocks, no distractions, only the sound of keys. Each time she touched the piano, the silence around her would bloom into color. Mr. Voss didn't treat her like a student. He treated her like a hidden voice finally stepping out of the shadows. He never shouted, never rushed her. He simply listened even when she made mistakes. And when she got a piece right, he would only say, "Do it again." But softer this time. Let them feel the truth, not the technique. One day, after a long lesson, he handed her a folder. Inside was an invitation, the Winter Bloom Gala, a once-a-year event where only 5 performers were chosen to play. And this year, Mr. Voss had secretly entered her name. She froze, her breath caught halfway. "This is too much," she said softly. "I'm not ready." He looked her straight in the eyes. "You're not ready because you still think you're just a waitress," he said. "But the world already heard you, Lily. You just haven't heard yourself yet." That night, she walked home slowly. Snow was falling lightly, covering the street like a soft memory. She passed by the restaurant where everything had started. Through the window, she saw Mr. Dalton sitting alone at a table. Sipping coffee, their eyes met for a moment. He gave her a small nod, not proud, not powerful, just human, she nodded back, then kept walking. At home, her mother was waiting with hot tea and a blanket. Lily sat on the couch and told her everything, the gala, the fear, the hope. Her mother listened quietly, her eyes glowing with quiet joy. "You were never afraid of music," she said gently. "You were afraid of being seen." Lily looked at her mother's hands, once strong, now thin and fragile. Those hands had once taught her how to press piano keys, how to feel, not just play. She took them in her own and said, "If I do this, it's for you." Her mother smiled. "No, my love. You do this for yourself now." The next few days were the hardest. She practiced for hours, her fingers stiff, her back aching. She played until the studio lights dimmed. She made mistakes, got frustrated, and sometimes cried, but never quit, Mr. Voss watched without speaking too much. But one afternoon, when she played the piece perfectly, he finally whispered, "She's ready." The night of the Winter Bloom Gala arrived. The grand hall sparkled with chandeliers and golden railings. People wore black suits, long gowns, and diamond smiles. Lily stood behind the red curtain, wearing a simple navy blue dress borrowed from Mr. Voss's daughter. She held her hands together. Trying to stop them from shaking, her name was announced. The applause began before she even stepped out. She walked slowly toward the grand piano in the center of the stage, each step echoing louder than the last. She sat down, looked at the keys, and remembered everything, the dare, the dusty piano, the laughter, the silence, the old apartment, her mother's voice. She took one deep breath, then played. The hall fell into a hush. There was no coughing, no whispering, no distraction, only music, soft, raw, full of truth. She wasn't showing off. She was speaking through every note. The story of a girl who once carried trays now traveled through the hearts of strangers dressed in pearls. When she finished, she didn't look up. She just closed her eyes and waited. And then the sound came. Not a gasp, not a whisper, but a roar of applause that made the chandeliers tremble. People stood, clapped, cried, some even cheered her name. Backstage, Mr. Voss waited, smiling. He didn't rush to greet her. He knew she had found herself, and that was something no teacher could ever give. The next morning, Lily stood by her window, holding a mug of tea. Her hands were still sore from the night before, but her heart felt light for the first time in years. The echo of applause still rang in her ears, but louder than that was the silence after her last note. That silence, so deep and still, had meant more than the standing ovation. She turned to look at her mother, who had fallen asleep on the couch, a small smile resting on her face. Lily kissed her forehead and whispered, "It's starting to feel real now." For so long, life had been about surviving, not dreaming. Now it felt like both were possible. Later that day, Lily returned to Mr. Voss's studio. The room welcomed her like an old friend, but today, the piano felt different, like it was listening to her now, not just speaking. Mr. Voss greeted her with a quiet nod, as always. But something in his eyes had changed. There was pride, yes, but also something deeper, like awe. "You understand now," he said. "It's not about how fast or how perfect. It's about how honest." Lily nodded slowly. "I finally played like I wasn't afraid," he smiled. "That's the only way that matters." He handed her a letter, its envelope marked with a golden crest. She opened it carefully. Inside was an official invitation from the National Symphony Guild. They had watched her performance at the gala and wanted her to be part of an upcoming concert titled New Voices of the Year. It was the biggest opportunity she had ever seen. She stared at the letter for a long time, then looked up, her voice soft. "Do you think I'm ready for something like this?" Mr. Voss didn't answer with words. He simply pointed at the piano. Lily smiled, walked over, and played not a song this time, but a few notes that said, yes. As the days went by, news began to spread. Interviews were requested, scholarships offered, and music schools that once ignored her now sent letters begging her to visit. But Lily stayed quiet. She didn't rush. She wasn't chasing fame. She was still Lily, the girl who once carried dishes with trembling hands. One afternoon, she returned to the restaurant, not to work, but to visit. The staff welcomed her like a guest of honor. Even the kitchen crew clapped when she walked in. Mr. Dalton, who happened to be there, stood up immediately. He reached out and shook her hand with quiet respect. "I heard about the concert," he said. "I'll be there." She nodded, surprised. Why? He smiled. Because once I dared a waitress to embarrass herself, and instead, she reminded me of who I used to be. Lily didn't speak. She simply placed a small card on the piano. It said, "Sometimes grace is louder than gold," before she left. She walked to the corner where the piano stood. She pressed a single key, then whispered, "Thank you." That night at home, her mother handed her a small gift, wrapped in newspaper and tied with string. Lily opened it slowly and gasped. It was a photograph, old and faded, of Lily sitting at a broken keyboard as a child. Her mother beside her, smiling proudly. Underneath it was a handwritten note. It read, "You are always music, even in silence." She held the picture close to her chest and closed her eyes. Memories washed over her, not just the pain, but the beauty buried inside it. She practiced every day for the upcoming concert, but she no longer practiced to impress, she practiced to speak, to say everything she never could with words. On the day of the concert, the grand stage was filled with flowers, cameras, and famous faces. But Lily didn't look at the crowd. She looked up at the sky, whispered her mother's name, then walked to the piano. No fear, no doubt. Just music waiting to rise as she sat down. The conductor whispered in awe, "She's the soul that silence waited for." The grand concert hall was packed with people. Musicians tuned their instruments backstage. Sound technicians rushed around with headsets, and cameras blinked under the lights. But behind the curtain, Lily sat alone on a small bench. Eyes closed, breathing slowly. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no makeup. She didn't need anything extra tonight. Her music would be the only thing shining. She had one hand on the piano, feeling the keys without playing them. Like greeting old friends before a battle. Just then, Mr. Voss entered quietly. He didn't speak at first, only stood near her with his hands behind his back. After a long pause, he said, "Do you know who is sitting in the front row tonight?" Lily looked up, confused. "No." "The president of the conservatory board," he said. "3 world-famous pianists and—" He stopped for dramatic effect, then smiled. "Someone very special to you." Lily blinked. "Who?" But he just patted her shoulder and whispered, "Go find out with your music." Moments later, her name was called. She stood slowly, the crowd cheering as the lights turned toward the stage. Lily walked across the wooden floor. Calm but burning inside, she didn't bow, didn't wave. She just sat at the piano and placed her fingers gently on the keys. And then she played. The hall transformed. The audience disappeared, the cameras vanished. In her mind, it was just her mother, and the keys. She played a piece no one had heard before. Her own composition, filled with highs and lows, the sound of childhood, struggle, laughter, and silence. The music rose like sunlight breaking through clouds, and then fell into a whisper like a tired breath. Each note carried emotion so raw that the crowd forgot to breathe. As she played the final section, her eyes lifted for a moment, and there, front row, second seat, was her mother in a wheelchair, wrapped in a warm shawl. Someone had brought her there without telling Lily. Her hands covered her mouth, eyes shining with tears. Lily's fingers didn't shake, they danced. She poured everything she had into those last few notes, not to impress the world, but to say to her mother, "This is your gift inside me." When she struck the final chord, the hall froze, then all at once. The crowd stood, they clapped, they shouted. Some even wept openly, but Lily didn't look at them. She looked at her mother, who had placed her hand over her heart. That was the only applause she needed. After the performance, reporters gathered near the stage. Music critics called it the rebirth of soul piano. Some even said her name would become part of music history. Backstage, she found Mr. Voss waiting for her, his eyes wet with pride. "You didn't just play tonight," he said. "You healed." Just then, a young boy approached, maybe 10 years old, holding a notebook. "Miss Lily," he said shyly, "can you teach me one day?" She smiled gently, knelt down and said, "Only if you promise to play from the heart." Outside, as the night cooled and the stars came out, Lily pushed her mother's wheelchair slowly down the steps. The crowd parted for them with quiet respect. People didn't ask for autographs. They just looked at her like she was something rare, something real. Mr. Dalton appeared at the exit, holding something in his hands. It was the same dusty piano key she had pressed the night he dared her to play. He had kept it, mounted it on a small frame. "I figured you'd want to keep the moment that changed everything," he said. Handing it to her, Lily looked at it, then smiled. "It didn't change everything," she said. "It just reminded me who I've always been. That night, When they returned home, her mother whispered, "I've never been prouder of anything in my life." Lily sat beside her, holding the framed piano key. "I didn't win a prize," she said softly. "No," her mother replied. "You became one." Far away from the noise, the lights and the cameras, Lily knew the truth. She hadn't been discovered, she had rediscovered herself. And as long as she had music, she would never be invisible again. Weeks passed since the concert, but the world didn't stop talking about Lily Morgan. Articles called her the soul pianist of the century. Music magazines placed her on covers next to names she had once only whispered about in dreams. Interviews poured in, invitations from orchestras, concert halls, even international stages. But Lily didn't say yes to everything. She chose carefully, not chasing fame, but following feeling. She didn't want to become a celebrity. She wanted to remain human, honest, and grounded. Her first official performance as a guest artist was not in Paris or New York. It was in a small city hospital, in the children's cancer ward. She wore no gown, brought no cameras, just her fingers and a portable keyboard, and there, surrounded by quiet smiles and tired eyes, she played lullabies. One little girl, bald from chemo, asked, "Are you famous?" Lily smiled. "Only when I play for people like you." Word spread again, but in a different way, not just about the piano prodigy, but about the kindness, the humility, the girl who never forgot where she came from. People began calling her the pianist of the people. At home, Lily's mother grew weaker. The illness had returned. But this time the doctors were honest. "There's not much time," they said gently. Lily didn't cry in front of her mother. She simply held her hand, played soft music each night, and whispered stories about every concert, every child she met, every place she traveled. One night, as rain tapped gently on the window, her mother asked, "Do you remember the little keyboard we had?" Lily nodded. It was missing 2 black keys. Her mother laughed softly. "And you still made music with it?" Lily leaned closer. "That's because you showed me how." Her mother reached up, touched her cheek, and whispered, "Promise me something." "Anything," Lily said. "When I'm gone, don't let them turn your music into noise." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I won't." That was the last night her mother spoke. She passed peacefully, wrapped in a blanket and music. The funeral was small, simple, filled with people who mattered. Mr. Voss stood silently beside Lily, his hand on her shoulder. Mr. Dalton was there too, holding a bouquet and wiping his eyes when no one looked. Even the little boy from the concert hall came, holding a rose in his tiny hands. Lily didn't perform that day. She didn't speak much, but she placed the old photo, her and her mother at the broken keyboard, inside the casket, and whispered, "You were always the music." After the funeral, she took a break from performing. She stayed home alone, just her and the piano, but instead of sadness, something else began to grow inside her, a new melody, one she'd never played before. She began to write not just music, but letters to children, to young musicians, to waitresses like she once was. She created a small program called Keys of Grace. It offered free music lessons to anyone who couldn't afford them. No tests, no uniforms, no pressure, just feeling, expression, and heart. She taught under bridges, in shelters, in community centers, and every time a child touched the keys with wonder in their eyes, Lily smiled and said, "That's what my mother would have wanted." Years passed, and her name became part of music history, but she never chased trophies, never wore diamonds on stage. She wore a bracelet made from old piano strings, gifted to her by one of her first students. One day she returned to the same restaurant where it all began. It had changed, new staff, new paint, new music, but the grand piano in the corner was still there. Dusty, silent, waiting, she walked over, placed her hand on it, and smiled. A young waitress walked up, not recognizing her. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said politely. "Are you here for dinner?" Lily shook her head gently. "Just visiting an old friend." She sat down, pressed a key, and began to play softly, simply, not for applause but for memory. The staff paused. The few guests in the room stopped eating. And once again, just like before, the room filled with quiet magic. When she finished, the young waitress whispered, "That was beautiful." Lily stood, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Sometimes all it takes is one dare to find your voice," and then she left, quietly, gracefully, like a melody fading into the night. But her music remained, echoing in hearts, in hallways, in every hand that ever touched a piano with hope. Because Lily Morgan was never just a pianist. She was a reminder that greatness can rise from silence, that kindness has power, and that even in the darkest corners, someone with trembling hands can light up the world.